welcome to today's deep dive. We are so glad you are here with us.
Yeah, really glad to have you here.
Right off the bat, before we even get into the heavy lifting of today's conversation,
Mhm.
make sure you take a second to like and subscribe to the show.
Please do. It really helps.
It genuinely helps us continue bringing you these extensive, highly detailed breakdowns of complex material. And you're not going to want to miss a single one of the conversations we have lined up.
Absolutely not.
Today, we have a mission that is going to require us to really sift through some incredibly dense, highly provocative material.
Oh, dense is an understatement.
Right. We are reviewing a brand new explosive ebook.
Mhm.
It's titled Darwin versus Delusion: Evolutionary Truths Woke Culture Denies.
And the author is Conrad Riker.
Yes, Conrad Riker.
Yeah.
This is a highly controversial text. I mean, it is written very specifically for a men's rights activist audience and for men who identify with the red-pilled manosphere.
Which is a huge and growing demographic online.
It really is. The book makes a bold claim. It offers a comprehensive blueprint for understanding the history and function of our modern institutions before they were, well, according to the author, systemically captured by radical feminists and cultural Marxists.
That's his core premise, yeah.
It is a text designed to hook you, to challenge your baseline assumptions about society, and frankly to make you want to buy it, just to see exactly how these intricate arguments are constructed from the ground up.
They are very intricate.
So if you want to follow along with our analysis, or if you want to read it for yourself to see the primary source material, you should check Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy the book. And make sure to follow the author at Conrad Riker on Substack.
That is exactly right. And before we open the first page of this text, we need to firmly and clearly establish the ground rules for today's analysis.
Yes, very important.
Because this source material contains highly politically charged content regarding gender dynamics, modern politics, and culture, it is absolutely critical to make abundantly clear to you, the listener, that we are never taking any sides in this discussion.
None whatsoever.
We are not endorsing the viewpoints, the politics, or the ultimate conclusions presented in this content.
Exactly. We don't play politics here.
Our sole mission today is to impartially report on the ideas contained in the original source material. We are going to break down Conrad Riker's arguments step by step, piece by piece, so that you can fully understand the specific, highly influential perspective that is currently shaping a massive corner of the modern cultural conversation.
Just giving you the facts of what the book says.
We are treating this text purely as an artifact to be examined. We want to give you a comprehensive clinical breakdown of exactly what is being argued, how the data is being utilized, and what the underlying philosophy is.
Okay, let's unpack this. Conrad Riker's core premise in Darwin versus Delusion is essentially that Western civilization is currently under an active, coordinated siege.
A total siege, according to him.
He builds a case that this siege is being led by a synthesis of cultural Marxism and radical feminism. But the unique angle he takes here, the angle is biological.
Which really sets it apart from typical political commentary.
Exactly. He argues that evolutionary truths, particularly those regarding male biology, male psychology, and evolutionary drive, are being actively and deliberately suppressed by our primary institutions.
He sets up this battlefield map very early in the book.
He does. He claims that men who operate on traditional software,
Traditional biological software, right?
right, traditional software, men who work hard, build things, and play by the established rules, they are now being systematically punished. They're labeled as toxic or categorized automatically as oppressors.
While their fundamental biological drive to protect, to provide, and to compete is being dismantled from the top down.
And he doesn't just speak in abstract philosophical terms either.
No, he immediately grounds this premise by launching an assault on modern institutions, starting with the education system.
The mediocrity mandate.
Yes. He introduces a concept he terms the mediocrity mandate. The underlying premise here is that meritocracy, which is the system that historically rewarded competence, singular drive, and objective, measurable achievement, has been deliberately replaced.
Replaced by what, exactly?
Well, according to the text, the modern apparatus of schools and universities now actively works to punish male excellence in order to achieve a state of artificial mandated equity.
So dragging the top down instead of pulling the bottom up.
Precisely. Riker argues that the current educational framework isn't actually designed to raise marginalized groups up to a higher standard of excellence. Instead, he claims the system is meticulously designed to drag high achievers down, effectively criminalizing male competence because that competence creates unequal, albeit earned, outcomes.
The specific examples he uses to anchor this claim are, they're meant to be highly disruptive to the reader.
It's very disruptive.
We've all heard the broad debates about education, but Riker points to a specific incident involving a Texas dad in 2022.
I remember reading this part.
Yeah, this father sat down to look at his son's middle school algebra homework, only to find that the actual math equations had been replaced with what the school called a reparations calculator.
A reparations calculator in algebra class.
In algebra class. The students weren't solving for X. They were literally tallying up imaginary generational debts based on their skin color and demographic background.
And the response from the school was wild.
Oh, when the father went to the school to question why math class wasn't teaching math, the teacher allegedly informed him that numbers have power structures.
Numbers have power structures. That is just...
It's wild. Riker pairs this local anecdote with a much larger policy, California's 2021 Ethnic Studies Model Curriculum.
Yes, the decolonized math movement.
Right. The book claims this curriculum literally instructs educators that traditional mathematics perpetuates capitalist, imperialist, and racist ideologies. Riker labels this entire movement decolonized math.
What the author is doing here is linking these ideological shifts in the curriculum directly to empirical, measurable outcomes. He isn't just complaining about the philosophy.
It brings the receipts.
He points to the plummeting global math scores to back up his thesis. He notes that American teenagers now rank 38th globally in mathematics. 38th, which places them behind countries with fractions of our GDP, like Belarus and Croatia. Furthermore, he links this mediocrity mandate to a very specific, highly concerning statistic: a 22% crash in male engineering enrollment since 2010.
That is a massive drop.
Riker's sociological argument here is fascinating from a behavioral perspective. He argues that when effort and objective reality become irrelevant, when school districts implement equity grading systems that adjust group test scores based on identity factors rather than individual objective merit, smart young boys simply check out of the system.
Wait, I want to pause on that 22% crash in engineering enrollment. Is Riker claiming that this drop is entirely due to things like equity grading and ideology? Or does he acknowledge other economic factors at play in the modern university system?
He acknowledges that the university system is bloated, certainly, but he places the lion's share of the blame squarely on the ideological shift.
Based on evolutionary psychology.
Right. His argument is rooted in male evolutionary psychology. He asserts that young men are biologically wired to seek out hierarchies based on competence. They want to know the rules of the game, they want to compete, and they want the best performer to win.
Makes sense.
When they recognize that the educational system no longer rewards objective right answers, when the game is rigged to ensure equal outcomes regardless of input, they stop participating. They view the institution as fundamentally corrupt and unworthy of their competitive energy.
And the text argues that this exact same mechanism extends right up into the highest tiers of higher education admissions.
The concept of meritocide.
Yes, meritocide, which he defines as the systemic extermination of achievement. He highlights a specific, highly publicized case from 2023 where a Korean-American teenager scored a mathematically perfect 1600 on the SAT.
Perfect score.
Flawless GPA, and yet faced a massive pile of rejection letters from the Ivy League. According to the book, this isn't an anomaly. Riker points to the data revealed when Harvard was sued over its admissions practices.
The numbers from that lawsuit were staggering.
He notes that admissions officers essentially admitted that Asian applicants need SAT scores up to 450% higher than their black peers just to get past the initial screening process.
Riker draws a very sharp historical parallel to contextualize this meritocide. He compares these modern holistic admissions practices, where personality scores and identity metrics outweigh test scores, directly to the Jewish quotas that were imposed by Ivy League institutions like Harvard in the 1920s.
Oh wow, that's a heavy comparison.
It is. Back then, Jewish students were outperforming the established demographic, so the universities changed the rules to protect what Riker calls WASP mediocrity. White Anglo-Saxon Protestant mediocrity.
So shifting the goalposts.
Exactly. In his view, the bureaucratic playbook hasn't changed a single bit in a century. The institutions have simply swapped out the targeted demographic. He argues that the modern iteration of this meritocide will happily praise a female student for organizing a gender-neutral bake sale, while actively rejecting a male student who achieves objective, data-driven excellence in advanced physics, simply because his demographics do not fit the desired top-down diversity matrix.
Here's where it gets really interesting. because the book transitions from how schools treat academic merit to how they treat the physical reality of male biology itself.
The beta male factory.
Right. Riker argues that the modern education system essentially functions as a beta male factory. Let's look at the claim regarding the pathologizing of normal male behavior. He points out that the CDC and various psychological bodies have quietly begun reclassifying normal boyhood risk-taking behavior as a mental health disorder for boys under the age of 18.
Which fundamentally attacks how boys naturally develop.
The underlying premise here is that the very biological wiring that drove human explorers to cross oceans or build skyscrapers is now being treated as a disease that needs to be cured or managed.
And the statistics Riker cites to support this claim are, from his perspective, indicative of a massive public health crisis. He notes that roughly 4 million boys in the United States are currently prescribed heavy anti-anxiety or ADHD medications.
4 million. That is a lot of kids.
The text argues that this isn't a medical breakthrough. It's chemical castration of childhood energy and defiance. To illustrate how systemic this is, Riker looks at the physical environment of the schoolyard. He cites a Florida middle school that explicitly banned the game of tag.
Banned tag.
Yes. Administrators called it a form of violent exclusion.
You cannot make this stuff up.
He mentions Eagle Rock Elementary, which banned dodgeball by citing gendered violence paradigms. But Riker doesn't just mock these administrative decisions, he pairs them with hard neurological data.
This is the Cambridge study, right?
Yes. He brings in a 2022 Cambridge study showing that boys who are systematically deprived of rough and tumble play, activities like wrestling, mock battles, and physically competitive games, actually develop 50% weaker spatial reasoning skills as they mature.
50% weaker spatial reasoning. So the argument is that by banning these physical competitive games in the name of safety or equity, schools are literally stunting boys' neurological and brain development.
That is his exact argument.
The book invites you to consider how what he calls doping boys into docility serves the state and these massive bureaucratic institutions. Riker argues that a society that domesticates its men, drugging them so they will sit completely still under fluorescent lights for 8 hours a day and comply with every directive, is doing so with a long-term goal.
Compliance.
Right. He claims that docile, medicated boys eventually grow up to become compliant, unquestioning taxpayers who lack the internal fire to challenge bureaucratic authority.
Which is a profound societal critique.
Yeah.
And if the physical body and the immediate environment of the boy are being policed and suppressed, how is the system handling his mind and his understanding of the world?
That brings us to Riker's next major section, the rewrite of history.
Riker asserts that the education system is not only suppressing male biology in the present, but it is also actively rewriting the past to erase male agency.
With a very specific goal in mind.
The goal, according to the text, is to strip young boys of their historical role models and manufacture a generation of what he calls guilt-ridden drones who are fundamentally ashamed of their own lineage and civilizational achievements.
Riker uses some highly specific local news stories to anchor this broader claim about historical vandalism. He mentions a high school student in Ohio who was suspended in 2023 simply for wearing a hooded sweatshirt featuring Betsy Ross's original 13-star American flag.
The original flag.
Yeah. The principal of that school allegedly labeled the historical flag as hate speech.
Unbelievable.
He describes another incident where a Texas teacher failed a male student's historical essay on Thomas Edison, the reason for the failing grade. The student didn't center Hedy Lamarr in the essay about the invention of the light bulb.
Even though Hedy Lamarr had nothing to do with the light bulb.
Despite the objective historical fact that Lamarr's brilliant work on frequency hopping technology had absolutely nothing to do with Edison's patents from decades earlier.
It's forced insertion of diversity into historical fact.
And perhaps the most audacious example he cites, the book claims Benjamin Franklin was entirely erased from the electricity and invention lessons in a specific Texas school district for being slave adjacent.
Slave adjacent.
Right, Riker points out the sheer historical illiteracy of this, noting they completely omitted the fact that Franklin actually founded the first abolitionist society in America.
Riker takes all these isolated classroom moments and ties them together to attack the whole system, specifically targeting the 1619 Project.
We've all seen the debates on that.
Now, you've probably heard the endless political debates about the 1619 Project on social media or the news, but what's unique here is how Riker specifically ties it to male psychology.
How does he frame it?
He notes that this project is currently being taught in over 4,500 classrooms across the country. And this is despite facing massive documented pushback from esteemed Pulitzer-winning historians like Gordon Wood.
And James McPherson, too.
Exactly. Even leftist historians like James McPherson, who thoroughly debunked its central claim that the American Revolution was fought primarily to preserve the institution of slavery.
So why is it being taught, according to Riker?
Riker's view is that implementing this curriculum isn't about providing a more nuanced historical education. He calls it psychological warfare. By deliberately reframing the Founding Fathers exclusively as villains, oppressors, and slavers, rather than as brilliant visionaries who built a framework for freedom, the system systematically strips history of its male heroes.
Leaving nothing to look up to.
It ensures that young boys looking back at their history have absolutely nothing to aspire to and no one to emulate.
And the text makes it clear that this betrayal doesn't stop with the historical figures of the past. Riker pivots sharply to how this exact same ideology impacts the modern military, and specifically the men who actually volunteer to fight our wars and project our national power.
The active duty and the veterans.
Right. He details the story of a Marine veteran who walked into a Portland coffee shop wearing a standard "Don't Tread on Me" Gadsden flag hat. According to the book, this veteran was screamed at by a manager for promoting hate speech and literally had a latte dumped on his uniform.
A terrible visual.
Riker uses this visceral image to illustrate a broader societal culture that now actively prosecutes its protectors rather than honoring them.
He categorizes this systemic weakening of the armed forces as the diversity dilution doctrine within the military-industrial complex.
The diversity dilution doctrine.
Riker argues that ideological bureaucrats are fundamentally compromising the military by prioritizing victimhood metrics and diversity quotas over objective merit, lethality, and survival.
Lethality being kind of important for a military.
Very important. To back this up, he cites a comprehensive MIT study that tracked a massive 34% drop in unit morale in military squads that were forced to adopt newly implemented gender-neutral fitness standards.
34% is a huge drop in morale.
Riker points to the inescapable biological reality that average male upper body strength is 40% greater and neck muscle mass is 38% greater than their female counterparts. He argues that ignoring these hard physical realities in life or death combat scenarios is an equity casualty calculus.
Equity casualty calculus, meaning it's going to cost lives.
Exactly. It is a political game that will inevitably get soldiers killed in the field.
The betrayal, according to Riker, extends deeply into how these veterans are treated when they actually make it home. The book highlights the Veterans Affairs system, claiming that VA clinics are allegedly diverting crucial administrative staff and mental health funding away from frontline care and funneling it into internal diversity and inclusion initiatives.
Which is devastating for the men who need that care.
It is. Riker cites a highly critical 2023 VA audit indicating that, as a result of this bureaucratic bloat, male combat vets are left waiting up to 22% longer simply to get an appointment for PTSD care.
22% longer wait times.
And the text claims that when these men finally do get into a therapy room, their battlefield survival instincts, their learned stoicism, their emotional compartmentalization are fundamentally misunderstood and pathologized by modern therapists.
He brings up the story of Jake Turner, right?
Yes, he tells the heartbreaking story of Jake Turner, a Marine who lost both of his legs in an IED blast. According to Riker, Turner's civilian therapist scolded him for not emoting enough during his sessions, officially diagnosing his quiet resilience and stoicism as a manifestation of toxic masculinity.
This specific framing of male suffering brings us to what might be Riker's most provocative question in the entire book. It is a question that challenges the listener's fundamental assumptions about modern sociological power dynamics.
It's a heavy question.
He asks, if male privilege is an absolute systemic reality that permeates every facet of our culture, as we are constantly told, why does that privilege only seem to apply to suffering, sacrifice, and death?
Right.
Riker argues that society continually demands extreme male sacrifice to keep the physical gears of civilization functioning, but simultaneously lectures those exact same men about their unearned advantages.
The data he pulls to deconstruct this myth of male privilege is stark and hard to ignore. Let's look at the claim regarding workplace safety. He points directly to the OSHA Fatal 4 statistics, noting that men account for a staggering 93% of all workplace fatalities in the United States.
93%.
Just think about that for a second. 93%. It's one of those statistics that is so high, It almost loses its meaning until you actually picture the individuals behind the numbers.
They are actual lives.
Men are the ones dangling from high-tension power lines in the freezing rain. They are the ones dying on offshore oil rigs, and they make up 97% of fatal falls in the construction industry.
And this leads into his theory of the safety ceiling.
Yes, Riker introduces a concept he calls the safety ceiling. He argues that modern feminist advocates demand equal pay and 50-50 boardroom quotas in air-conditioned corporate offices, but fiercely and universally avoid the dangerous, back-breaking, lethal labor that actually keeps the lights on, the water running, and the roads paved.
Riker extends this economic and biological analysis to thoroughly deconstruct the highly publicized gender pay gap.
This part was fascinating.
Instead of accepting the premise of systemic wage discrimination, he cites a detailed Harvard University study showing that unmarried, childless women actually own 93% of men's wages in comparable fields. But they achieve this while working, on average, 8% fewer hours.
8% fewer hours.
He contrasts the mainstream narrative of systemic patriarchal wage oppression with a concept he terms the comfort premium.
The comfort premium.
This is the measurable sociological tendency for women, on average, to prioritize lower-paying jobs that offer a better work-life balance, safer conditions, and more flexibility. Conversely, he points out the data showing that men work 42% more overtime hours globally.
42% more overtime. That's driven by biology.
Riker attributes this to testosterone and a deep evolutionary competitive drive to acquire resources to attract a mate. Yet, he notes, this relentless male hustle is mocked in modern media as toxic capitalism or workaholism, while those same men are simultaneously expected to maintain their traditional role as providers.
Riker frames this entire dynamic under the umbrella term of sacrificial capital. He argues that male lifespan, male physical health, and male labor aren't just biological destinies. They are society's favorite, most exploitable, renewable resource.
And nowhere is that more obvious than the justice system.
Exactly. The book claims that nowhere is this exploitation more evident and mathematically quantifiable than in the criminal justice system. The book highlights the incredible, deeply entrenched double standards in the courts, noting a study showing that men receive sentences that are, on average, 63% longer than women for committing the exact same identical federal crimes.
The disparity there is profound and well documented. Riker points to the fact that male inmates make up 93% of state and federal prison populations.
93% again.
But he doesn't just look at the incarceration rate, he looks at the labor extraction. He points out that male inmates are the ones comprising 98% of prison firefighting crews in places like California, risking their lives on the front lines of massive wildfires for a mere $2.90 a day.
$2.90 a day to fight wildland fires.
He argues that this incarceration industrial complex generates billions of dollars in saved labor and resources off the backs of male bodies. Riker points out the hypocrisy, from his view, of activists lobbying for corporate boardroom equity while completely ignoring the literal, state-sponsored chain gangs of men performing hazardous, life-threatening labor for pennies.
He also tackles the broader macroeconomic system through the specific lens of taxation versus welfare. Riker points to data from the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, showing that men pay roughly 70% of all income taxes globally.
70%?
Yet they are the recipients of less than 30% of state welfare spending. He frames this massive wealth transfer as fiscal cuckoldry and a form of economic slavery.
The argument is that the modern state has essentially stepped in to act as a surrogate provider for women and children,
forcibly extracting male earnings through taxation to subsidize bureaucratic systems and lifestyles that, ironically, often actively demonize those exact same working-class men.
This concept of the systemic legal extraction of male resources leads directly into Riker's blistering, highly detailed critique of family law.
This chapter is huge.
He dedicates a massive portion of the book to delving into what he calls the alimony industrial complex and the marriage plantation system. The core argument here is that modern marriage, aided by no-fault divorce laws and biased courts, has been fundamentally transformed.
Transformed from a partnership into what?
It is no longer a sacred partnership or a societal building block. Instead, it has become a highly lucrative extortion racket facilitated by the power of the state.
The stories he shares in this section are incredibly visceral, designed to evoke a sense of absolute terror in young men considering marriage. You read about a San Diego software engineer who works grueling 80-hour weeks, lives out of his Honda Civic to save money, and yet is court-ordered to pay 65% of his gross income to his ex-wife.
65%.
And the kicker, the text claims his ex-wife actually earns $80,000 more a year than he does.
Wow.
But the judge ordered the payments just so she could maintain the lifestyle she grew accustomed to during their very short marriage.
It's the legal framework enabling it.
Or he details the story of a Florida man who was physically shackled and thrown in county jail for contempt of court after losing his job during recession and missing his child support payments. Riker points out that this man was treated as a violent criminal simply for the mathematical impossibility of materializing money out of thin air while unemployed.
Riker breaks down the specific legal and philosophical frameworks that enable this kind of judicial outcome, focusing heavily on the Duluth model.
The Duluth model. Explain that.
Now, for those who might not know the intricate history of domestic violence law, the Duluth model was developed in the 1980s. Riker explains that this framework fundamentally assumes that men are the primary aggressors in domestic disputes by default.
By default.
Right. And that domestic violence is entirely rooted in patriarchal control rather than psychological issues, substance abuse, or mutual conflict. Riker argues this model values ideological narratives over fair, evidence-based legal procedures.
So it strips away the presumption of innocence.
He claims this has turned the concept of due process, the idea of being innocent until proven guilty, into a male extinction event in family court. Furthermore, he points to staggering data showing that in major states, 92% of contested custody cases default to awarding primary custody to mothers.
92%.
Riker asserts that this systematically strips fathers of their fundamental right to raise their children, effectively turning them into indentured ATM machines who are only valued for their financial extraction.
And this legal extraction creates what Riker calls the fatherless epidemic. The societal cost of forcibly removing fathers from the home via state intervention is, according to the book, absolutely catastrophic.
And he brings the data to prove it.
He cites studies from Harvard economists who proved a direct correlation between state welfare and family breakdown. They found that every single dollar added to a state welfare check shrinks paternal presence in the home by 3.2%.
3.2% for every dollar.
Riker's interpretation of this data is that the state basically subsidizes and incentivizes single motherhood, making the biological father an optional, easily discarded accessory.
To illustrate exactly why this fatherlessness is so devastating to the fabric of society, Riker brings in a fascinating historical anecdote involving heavyweight boxing legend Mike Tyson and his legendary trainer, Cus D'Amato.
I love this analogy.
As Riker details, Tyson was a violent street criminal and a felon by the age of 13, seemingly destined for a short life in prison. But he was taken in and rebuilt by an older, unyielding male mentor in D'Amato, who instilled fierce discipline, extreme physical conditioning, and strict masculine expectations.
He channeled the chaos.
Exactly. Riker uses this incredibly potent analogy to argue that traditional masculinity, when properly channeled and mentored by older men, doesn't oppress society. It builds it. It creates discipline and order out of chaos. Without that masculine presence, chaos ensues. He supports this philosophical point with the chilling statistic that 78% of all heroin addicts in the United States are fatherless men.
78%. The assault on due process, according to Riker, isn't just limited to the family courts. He takes direct aim at college campuses and the weaponization of Title IX's regulations.
A campus tribunal.
The book details what he calls kangaroo courts operating within modern universities. In these campus tribunals, a male student's entire life, academic reputation, and future career can be completely ruined based on a standard of evidence called a preponderance of evidence.
Which is an incredibly low bar.
That means if a panel believes there is a 50.01% chance the accusation is true, a standard of proof literally lower than what is required to issue a parking ticket, the male student is expelled and branded a predator.
The data he pulls from the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, or FIRE, is heavily cited in this chapter to prove his point.
What does the FIRE data show?
Riker points out that, according to FIRE's audits, a shocking 80% of university Title IX investigations actually deny the accused student the basic right to present witness testimony or cross-examine their accuser.
80% deny witness testimony.
He argues that universities are terrified of bad PR and federal funding cuts, so they trade in victimhood futures. They treat accused young men as guilty until proven guiltier.
Guilty until proven guiltier.
And these tribunals are entirely managed by campus Title IX coordinators who, in many documented cases, openly admit their ideological bias toward believing accusers unconditionally.
So, if the legal courts and the educational schools are systematically rigged against men, how does the mainstream media handle these disparities? Riker argues that media narratives, combined with modern algorithmic technology, have completely rigged both the dating and social markets against the average man.
He brings up the Depp Heard trial here.
He points to the incredibly highly publicized Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial as the ultimate undeniable case study in modern media gaslighting. Think back to that trial. Despite Depp winning comprehensively in a court of law, presenting 87 pieces of hard evidence,
87 pieces.
including audio recordings of his abuser openly admitting to initiating violence and horrific medical records of his severed finger, the mainstream media still published think pieces mocking his injuries and framing him as the ultimate abuser.
Riker explains this bizarre disconnect between reality and reporting through the concept of narrative primacy.
Narrative primacy.
Because the media narrative was set decades ago, the rigid framework that men are always the abusers and women are always the victims, objective facts simply couldn't penetrate the ideological shield of the journalists covering the trial.
And he connects this to Aaron Pizzi.
To prove how deeply entrenched this is, Riker connects the Depp trial to the historical erasure of male domestic violence victims by bringing up the story of Aaron Pizzi. Pizzi is a pivotal figure. She opened the world's very first domestic violence shelter in the UK in 1971.
The very first one.
But, as Riker details, she was eventually exiled from the movement she started, had her dog killed, and received bomb threats from radical feminist groups.
For opening a shelter.
Why? Because she dared to publish data reporting that a significant portion of the women entering her shelter were actually as violent or more violent than the men they were fleeing. She recognized mutual violence, and for that she was erased.
So what does this all mean for the average guy who's just trying to navigate the world, maybe find a partner, and date? Riker describes a brutal, mathematically unforgiving landscape shaped by what he calls the infinite supermarket effect.
The dating apps.
He looks at how dating apps like Tinder and Bumble have fundamentally broken human mating dynamics. The math he presents is staggering. He cites data showing that 80% of all female attention and right swipes on these apps go exclusively to the top 10% or 15% of the most attractive, high-status men.
A winner-take-all market.
Because women are now presented with a literal infinite supermarket of options on their phones, Riker argues they have become biologically incapable of settling for the average, hardworking local men they would have historically married. This dynamic leaves a massive, unprecedented swath of the male population completely isolated, invisible, and devoid of intimacy.
And this profound social isolation fuels the dark underbelly of the internet, which Riker labels the OnlyFans economy.
The OnlyFans economy.
He analyzes the modern phenomenon of simping, where men lavish attention and money on women online who do not acknowledge them, framing it as an insidious new form of digital slavery. Lonely, isolated men are currently funding a $100 billion digital sex and parasocial relationship economy, paying exorbitant amounts of their working-class wages for the mere illusion of intimacy.
It's an illusion.
Wait, before we move on, let's unpack this through the biological lens Riker uses. He links this behavior directly to the evolutionary concept of costly signaling.
Costly signaling.
In biology, costly signaling is like a peacock growing a massive, heavy, brightly colored tail. It takes a ton of metabolic energy and makes the bird vulnerable to predators, but it proves to a female that the male is so capable he can survive despite this handicap.
So transferring biological traits to the digital world.
Riker maps this animal behavior directly onto modern guys going into credit card debt to buy gifts for OnlyFans models. These low-status males are diverting their hard-earned resources to women who would never date them in real life, effectively subsidizing the exact same hypergamous system that systematically excludes them.
On the flip side of this equation, Riker contrasts this epidemic of male loneliness with the harsh reality of the girl boss narrative that has been aggressively sold to women for the last 30 years.
The corporate empowerment script.
He shares the poignant story of a 35-year-old female tech executive living in San Francisco. She makes $500,000 a year, but she is spending $15,000 to medically freeze her eggs, sitting alone in her luxury apartment with her stock options, slowly realizing that her biological clock absolutely does not care about empowerment hashtags or corporate promotions.
The macro-demographic data supports the looming crisis Riker is pointing to. He needs the plunging U.S. and global fertility rates, which are now dropping well below the replacement level of 2.1 children per woman.
Well below replacement.
To explain the psychological toll of this, he cites recent Harvard surveys showing massive unreported levels of regret among career-obsessed women in their late 30s and 40s who followed the cultural script and prioritized corporate climbing over starting a family.
So his conclusion on feminism is what?
Riker's highly controversial argument here is that second and third wave feminism didn't actually liberate women. It simply enslaved them to the corporate boardroom, forcing them to behave like competitive men, while their unique biological realities and desires for motherhood were ignored by the culture until it was medically too late.
And the text points out that even if you do want to settle down and have a traditional family, you now face a new cultural hurdle. Riker points to the bizarre modern trend of climate hysteria and what he calls carbon natalism.
Carbon natalism.
He highlights how Western elites, media figures, and eco-activists are actively shaming regular working-class families for having children, flying on planes, or driving SUVs. He points to articles in mainstream publications pushing vasectomies on regular young men as a noble way to save the climate and reduce their carbon footprint.
Meanwhile, the rules don't apply to the top.
Exactly. As Riker scathingly notes, billionaires like Elon Musk and other elites are flying on private jets and praised for building massive multi-generational dynasties. Riker sees this entire movement as a form of elite population control disguised as environmentalism, specifically designed to eco-shame male provision, legacy building, and reproduction among the working classes.
Which brings us to Riker's final and perhaps most actionable major argument in the text. How are men supposed to actually survive and thrive in this incredibly hostile landscape he has mapped out?
What's his answer?
His answer is definitive. He argues that men must completely stop looking to mainstream institutions for validation. Instead, they must reclaim traditional masculine virtue and build resilient underground networks.
Underground networks.
He laments the systematic decline of traditional male spaces, pointing to the bankruptcy and ideological capture of the Boy Scouts after they were pressured and sued into admitting girls. He also points to tech platforms like meetup.com, which actively purged male-only bonding groups under the guise of enforcing new safe space and anti-discrimination policies.
He even brings up the incredible story of the UK's men's sheds movement.
Oh, the men's sheds, yes.
These were brilliantly simple, community-based workshops where older, often retired or lonely men could just gather, drink tea, build birdhouses, and bond shoulder to shoulder. It was a massive success. Peer-reviewed studies actually showed that participating in these men's sheds reduced male depression and suicide rates by a staggering 90%.
90% reduction in depression.
Yet, as Riker details, local city councils and feminist groups smeared these literal lifesavers for gatekeeping masculinity and demanded they be shut down or forced to include women, which completely destroyed the dynamic that made them effective in the first place.
Because, as Riker argues, modern bureaucratic institutions fundamentally fear unregulated male bonding.
So what is his proposed solution?
His proposed antidote to this isolation is a hard return to stoicism and deliberate physical action. He outlines a specific daily framework for his readers called the 3-5-1 Protocol.
The 3-5-1 Protocol.
It is designed to rebuild the male mind and body. The protocol dictates that a man must lift heavy weights 3 days a week to rebuild his physical strength and testosterone. He must read classical Stoic philosophers like Marcus Aurelius or Seneca daily, to memorize 5 specific quotes to fortify his mind against emotional manipulation. And he must perform 1 competitive physical act of service weekly to reconnect with his community.
3-5-1.
He highlights underground, decentralized groups like the Stoic Legion that are implementing this. These groups combine intense MMA sparring and physical training with deep philosophical debates, using voluntary physical hardship to rebuild the mental resilience that modern therapeutic coddling culture has systematically destroyed.
This raises an important question. If this protocol is the individual solution, how is the actual pushback happening on a macro-cultural level? Riker details what he calls the red pill resistance.
The red pill resistance.
He points to the massive cultural impact of the libs of TikTok effect, where simply exposing radical, bizarre school curricula and teacher rants online has led directly to normal, frustrated parents completely taking over local school boards.
The Mark Smith story.
He highlights the story of Texas dad Mark Smith, who ran for a board seat and won with the incredibly simple slogan, "Parents, not politicians." Riker also points to the rapid rise of 1776 curriculum initiatives, educational frameworks that teach the U.S. Constitution and classical history without the ideological self-flagellation and historical revisionism of the 1619 Project.
It is a highly decentralized, incredibly adaptive rebellion. Riker breaks down how men who are routinely deplatformed, banned, or demonetized from mainstream social media giants like YouTube or Twitter are simply migrating and thriving on encrypted networks, Telegram channels, and alternative video platforms like Rumble.
They are building parallel economies.
He discusses fascinating examples of financial jujitsu, like Operation PayPig, where organized groups of men deliberately drain resources and attention from the OnlyFans economy using networks of fake accounts and chargebacks.
Wow.
He also points to the cultural phenomenon of viral parody songs. Tracks like Simp Busters that explicitly utilize evolutionary psychology and red pill talking points in their lyrics. These independent tracks end up outstreaming massive studio-backed pop stars on Spotify and Apple Music.
Outstreaming pop stars.
Riker's ultimate point here is that top-down censorship isn't actually stopping the spread of these ideas. It is only accelerating the creation of a massive, parallel, and highly resilient information ecosystem that the mainstream institutions cannot control.
As we look at the totality of Conrad Riker's Darwin versus Delusion, it is a lot to take in.
It is. And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, something to explore on your own that builds logically on this source material but wasn't explicitly resolved in the chapters we covered.
Let's hear it.
Consider this deeply. If Riker is factually correct that modern society truly, fundamentally relies on the silent, dangerous, and back-breaking physical labor of men to keep the lights on, the water running, the bridges standing, and the entire physical infrastructure of civilization intact.
Right.
What happens to the framework of our world if a critical mass of these men simply decide to opt out? If they embrace a sort of collective Atlas Shrugged style strike and simply stop participating in an economic, legal, and social system they believe fundamentally despises and exploits them, how does a society that relies entirely on their physical sacrifice survive their absence?
It is an incredibly heavy, provocative question.
Yeah.
And it really gets to the core of the anxieties driving the manosphere today. And as a final reminder, we are simply the messengers today, impartially breaking down the complex worldview presented in Conrad Riker's text. We're not endorsing or condemning these views, but rather laying them out with clinical detail so you can understand this specific growing perspective.
Exactly.
It is entirely up to you, the listener, to weigh the data and decide what to do with this deep dive into the red pill perspective. If you want to hook into this conversation further, verify the statistics and read the source material for yourself, please check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy the ebook, and be sure to follow the author at Conrad Riker at Substack.
Highly recommend checking out the primary source.
Finally, if you appreciated this level of detailed analysis, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the show for more fascinating, in-depth, deep dives into the books shaping our world. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.